CBDFX's CBD products are formulated to boost overall wellness and deliver calm vibes for daytime and nighttime use. CBDFX uses only organically grown hemp and all natural ingredients. CBDFX's best-selling line of CBD products features wellness-boosting CBD and legal Delta-9 THC gummies, oil tinctures, capsules, pens, and other products. Visit CBDFX.com today and use code GENIUS to get 25% off site-wide, plus a free CBD bath bomb with your first purchase. The code is GENIUS, GENIUS. Don't miss this special 25% off offer for Finding Genius listeners, only at CBDFX.com. Offer expires August 31st, 2023. Feel the difference with CBDFX. Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. My guest today is Daniel Malone. He's a founder and content creator at Malone Financial. So we're going to talk about his work and his YouTube channel. So Daniel, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Yeah, tell me first a bit about your background. How did you get into finances? And then I want to ask you about your current work today.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. So when I was leaving school and kind of trying to pick university courses to study, I actually had previously no experience with business or finance, and I was kind of looking for something that was kind of broad, bit into in college. I did a business degree at undergraduate level because, as I said, it was broad. I then specialized in finance and accountancy, ended up doing a master's in accountancy then after college, and then I ended up working for PricewaterhouseCoopers for just under 5 years in the asset and wealth management division. So looking at auditing the financial statements of some of the biggest investment funds in the world, your Vanguards, your BlackRocks, etc. So yeah, worked there for about 5 years. Yeah, I during COVID, I kind of started a bit of a pandemic project where I started making online financial education content, primarily on YouTube, but later migrated over to TikTok and Instagram and LinkedIn and things like that.
So you said you were able to review financial statements from the world's biggest companies. What insights can you talk about from reviewing those? Any unexpected things you saw?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the big thing for me really was, again, I was kind of based in the investment funds division. So I'm looking at mutual funds, pension funds, ETFs, things like that. I suppose the big thing for me was really just seeing the complexity under the hood and the various different types of investments that can exist within pensions and mutual funds and things like that. I think when you talk about the investing world in the day-to-day life, people are kind of just like restricted to like stocks and bonds and things like that. But when you actually look at it from a professional lens and you're looking under the hood and auditing financial statements, you start to see a world of complex derivatives and options and forwards and swaps and all this kind of stuff. So it was really interesting to kind of take my previously novice approach to understanding investments and kind of learn more about the deeper side of things.
Well, do the big guys do anything in particular or very sophisticated, or they only do what's appropriate for their size? Or like, how would you characterize what they do versus, a small business in the US, let's say?
Yeah, I suppose they kind of just act in the best interest of their clients. It really depends on the particular fund in question. If you had a like a Vanguard S&P 500 fund, that's a passively managed fund. So they would be tracking the S&P 500 index, whereas we could be looking at a more actively managed pension fund who have lots of investment managers at the wheel who are making active decisions about their clients' money and where to allocate it and things like that. I suppose how it differs to, a regular brick and mortar business is that obviously you're dealing with investments of people's money as opposed to the sale of goods and services. So definitely a different side of business that people might not be used to, but interesting nonetheless.
So what is your current advisory focus on? Who is your current clients that you help?
Yeah, so what I do as my kind of full-time gig at the moment, as I said, is content creation online. So I wouldn't necessarily have one-to-one clients per se. My clients are technically the entirety of my viewership base. So I've scaled my YouTube channel to nearly 10,000 followers over the last 2 years. And across all social media channels, I have about 25,000 followers. And I get in the region of 10 to 15,000 views per month on my channel. So I would cover topics from pensions to personal investment portfolios to saving, budgeting, mortgages, buying a house, things like that. So a lot of my engagement with individual viewers will be in the comment section of videos where they might have questions about the content that I've covered. I am a fully qualified financial advisor. I just don't have a licensed practice where, I give formal financial advice in return for compensation. I'm kind of going, I suppose, a new way about it in terms of making the content free, but then getting paid in the form of ad revenue and partnerships with specific companies.
Do you have courses that you're making, or is it just your ad revenue and everything's free?
Yeah, it's pretty much driven by ad revenue and the viewerships that I get. I suppose my two main revenue streams are advertising, and then also, as I said, I do like partnerships with brokerage platforms that are operating here in Ireland and in Europe. So I would do that, and then I would also do like corporate speaking for the likes of Google and Meta and things like that, where I would talk to their employees about finance and financial decision making and things like that. So it's definitely a different approach to the kind of financial advisory sphere, but I definitely think over the next few years with Gen Z coming up the ranks, that's going to kind of revolutionize how, I suppose, financial advice is delivered and how people consume financial advice as well.
Well, what do you see changing recently over the past couple of years in terms of finance? I know it's a very broad question, but what are some things that jump out at you?
Yeah, the big thing for me has to be innovation, especially here in Europe. The European investing scene as a whole is much less developed than it is in the US and Canada. There's definitely a cultural shift happening here in Europe as a whole, where people are taking more of an active interest in their investments from a younger age. That's especially true when it comes to pensions and retirement planning as well. So what we're seeing is a lot more fintech startup companies really trying to change the game in terms of how people invest their money. So we're seeing a lot more modernization of investing. Whereas, just 10 years ago, if you were to try to invest in the stock market as an Irish investor or anyone living in Europe, it would be quite complex. The US is definitely far more ahead in terms of the innovation that you guys have over there. But we're seeing a lot more startup companies kind of come through the ranks and, I suppose, democratize investing for Europeans. So innovation has to be the biggest change I've seen over the last few years.
What about for individual investors, your audience? What kinds of things are important for them to look at and consider now with the current economy in Europe and the US?
Yeah, I think for me anyway, the biggest learning point over the last 3 years that I've seen people take on is to not get kind of caught up in the hype of what's going on in the short term. 2020, 2021, we saw a lot of people get into crypto and NFTs. And for a lot of people, that was the first time they ever put their money into the financial markets. And a lot of people got burned and lost money, and they weren't necessarily making sensible investments that made sense in the context of their own personal circumstances. So I think one of the key learning points for my viewers and beginner investors as a whole is that, you really kind of need to do your own research and make sure that the investments that you're selecting are suitable for you. There is an easy way to do that. You can just stick with low cost, passively managed index funds as recommended by the likes of Warren Buffett, John C. Bogle before he passed and things like that. So yeah, really not getting caught up in the hype, doing your research and keeping things simple is probably the biggest takeaway.
Well, are index funds and things like that, you think a prudent investment right now, or, what's your outlook for the equity stock market maybe this year?
Yeah, of course. I think the beauty of my investment approach and many others is that I'm a long-term investor. So I really, my investment horizon is no less than 10 to 15 years. So I try not to get overly concerned about what's happening in the short term. I think it's very difficult to predict, accurately what way the stock market is going to go in the short term. But for index fund investors, we don't really care because, your investments are so diversified. Even if you're in an S&P 500 fund, you're diversified across the top 500 companies in the US, but you can equally be in an all all world index fund or European index fund. So I definitely think, how the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank and the Bank of England, react to changing inflation data and how that affects interest rates is obviously going to affect the valuation of equities, given the intrinsic link between equity valuations and interest rates. But I think the average investor doesn't really want to consider their investments on a day-to-day basis. They kind of want to just put their money somewhere where they know that over the long term it's going to grow quite reliably based on historical data. And I think index funds are the way to do that. So yeah, I wouldn't get overly concerned about what's happening in the short term. Still relevant and good to know what's happening. But for me, a long-term focus is what's required.
I go with any focus. You have a time horizon. So if yours is, let's say, 10 years, what trends do you think are going to develop over the next 10 to 15 years, and where people position themselves? Or it's just so impossible to tell, really index funds the only way to go?
Yeah, I think a great example of this is the likes of Cathie Wood's suite of ETFs and mutual funds with Arc Innovation, where those guys are kind of trying to pick the big winners of tomorrow in terms of AI and other kind of technical companies who are innovating in new spaces. But I think it's really hard to know where things are going to be in 12 months' time, let alone 10 years' time. I think we can have some pretty good indications as to what industries are ripe for disruption and what industries will emerge from new technologies. It's hard to know, what companies are going to be included in the likes of the S&P 500 in 10 years' time. I think I would take solace in the fact that, there's over 100 years worth of data that says that, if you just invest consistently, pretty much no matter what happens in terms of the macro environment and what companies come and go, if you do stick to high quality index funds, you are going to do well. But yeah, I think no industry is safe from disruption these days, especially with the advent of AI and how that's going to impact various industries. So yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see, but I don't have an answer as to what I think it will look like in 10 years.
CBDFX full spectrum and broad spectrum CBD products are formulated to boost overall wellness and deliver calm vibes for daytime and nighttime use. CBDFX is offering our listeners an exclusive 25% off, which I think is very generous, plus a free CBD bath bomb with your first purchase when you use the code GENIUS. Don't miss this special 25% off offer for Finding Genius listeners only at cbdfx.com. Offer expires August 31st, 2023. Feel the difference with CBDFX.
What are some of the topics that you teach on that have been very popular or well received on your channel?
Yeah, I think for me, the most popular topic is probably retirement planning. I think we hear so much bad news in terms of retirement planning here in Ireland and indeed in Europe in terms of our aging population and how, the vast majority of Europeans aren't on track for a financially comfortable retirement and the risk of poverty and things like that. So I think I get a lot of attention in terms of how not only young people, but just people who are in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s, how they can kind of take steps to ensure that they're doing the most they can for their financial well-being in retirement. So whether that's understanding what investments to make within their pensions, to how they actually go about drawing down that money in retirement and living off of it. Yeah, retirement seems to be a really popular topic that I cover. Whenever I make a video on it, the viewership tends to do quite well.
Well, what are some of the nuances of retirement planning that are unique to you versus maybe standard advice?
Yeah, I think for me, the avoidance of lifestyle creep can't be overemphasized. So lifestyle creep is effectively where, let's say you're contributing 5% of your gross salary to a pension or a retirement fund. And then over time, over 10, 15 years, you experience increases in your salary as you progress through your job or whatever you might be doing in your occupation. But instead of allocating more money to your retirement fund, you go and spend it on things that you may not need. You might increase your standard of living when you technically can't afford it, and then your kind of future investments get neglected. So while I think there's a lot of content around, where to put your money and what to invest in and things like that, I don't think the effects of lifestyle creep are discussed as much as they should be, because I feel like people tend to take a very short-term and myopic view on the retirement planning, whereby they say, okay, I'm really interested in my retirement right now, and for the next 2 years, I'm going to do really well in terms of maximizing my contributions to my retirement fund and things like that. But then over time, they tend to slip in terms of their discipline. So really staying consistent for long periods of time, investing in your retirement fund is one of the best pieces of advice I can give.
Yeah, but if you tell people to live beneath their means and save and save and save, I mean, what's the end point? Let's say, okay, they're 65, now they want to retire. But now it's like, okay, well, still don't splurge. Still be careful, because you got to shepherd your money for the rest of your life and make sure it lasts.
Yeah.
I don't know. When do people get to relax and spend what they worth?
Yeah, for sure.
For most people?
It's an interesting one because I definitely agree. I subscribe to the mentality that obviously you need to live your life and you need to enjoy experiences and spend money as needed. I think there is balance to be struck when you're working. And I think that sacrifices naturally do have to be made if you want to live the retirement that many people do. And for many people, that will just be maintaining their standard of living from pre to post retirement. In terms of like when you kind of get to take a break from the investing and taking your cash and enjoying it and stuff like that. It really comes down to the person. I mean, I would be of the mentality that if at all possible, you should continue your investing journey all the way through your retirement. And yes, you can obviously draw down your retirement fund and enjoy it and things like that. But if you're getting into things like estate planning and figuring out if you want to like leave a sizable sum of money to your children or your spouse or whatever, like things like that, I think the considerations around investments in retirement still become relevant throughout life. I don't think it's a case of, okay, I'm going to invest until I'm 60 and then I'm done and then happy days, I'm going to live off of my retirement fund. Because for a lot of people, if you're not invested throughout retirement, you're probably going to run out of money if you're not careful. So having it stayed invested in the stock market or wherever it might be, bonds, cash, at least then you're getting some amount of growth and you can kind of maintain the value of your fund over time.
Okay. Any other hot topics that you have to address or you want to address or you think is important to address on your channels?
The two biggest pieces of advice I always give on the channel is because investing is kind of the core topic that I cover. It's really the premise of the channel. People always ask me, where do I start? And a lot of the time they're like, oh, I have this amount of money in a bank account and I'm looking at this, and this. And, the one thing I always say is if you can maximize your investments into your retirement fund and get all of the great tax benefits that obviously vary from country to country, if you can maximize that, and then after you do that, if you still have money left over, then you can kind of look into investing in ETFs, index funds in your own personal retirement, your own personal investment portfolio. So, that's really the core piece of investing advice that I would give. In terms of other kind of hot topics, I mean, look, we could talk about I know housing and mortgages, things like that is a very important topic on my channel, but it varies so much from country to country because the housing market here is completely different to where it would be in the US or Canada or even in England across the water. So yeah, it certainly varies, but there's a lot of interesting topics there.
What about for employed people or entrepreneurs, solo 401ks or other instruments they'd have over in Europe? Are there many of those? Do you discuss them?
Yeah, I suppose we're kind of envious of the 401k over here in Ireland because our retirement system is much less developed and you have much less options than you guys do over in the States. For self-employed people, fortunately, there are some good tax advantages associated with retirement funding. For example, over here, you can contribute a lot of money out of your business into your pension fund for the benefit of the business owner, and you can pretty much avoid paying tax that way. Obviously, the drawback is that once the money goes into the pension, it can't be accessed until at least age 50, but it allows the entrepreneur to avoid any kind of income taxes or corporate taxes that they may have to pay on the money by contributing to a pension. So that's definitely a positive that exists over here. But yeah, pensions are definitely an important vehicle for self-employed and entrepreneurs. I think as well,